Welcome to the WPAOG podcast. This episode features an inspiring conversation with Lee Anderson, a distinguished West Point class of 1961 graduate. From his humble beginnings in Minneapolis to becoming the single most philanthropic graduate in West Point history, Anderson's journey is nothing short of remarkable. Hear how he transformed his father's small plumbing business into API Group Inc., a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and learn about his innovative leadership strategies. Discover the profound influence West Point had on his life, instilling values of resilience, teamwork, and service that continue to guide his extraordinary philanthropic efforts. Please enjoy this episode with our host, Dave Seary.
I'm here with Lee Anderson, West Point class of 1961. Welcome home, sir.
Thank you very much.
It's good to see you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
If you could, please tell me about your childhood.
Born in 1939 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Small family. I'm an only child. My father was married previously and had a son who was a graduate of 1948 here.
Okay.
Which is kind of an interesting fact. And I actually stayed in Minneapolis and participated in sports and a reasonably good student until senior year. The reason I ended up at West Point is kind of an interesting story. I was a fairly good athlete, so I had applied to a number of Eastern schools and had been accepted at all of them, with the exception of Princeton. And my dad one day said, getting to the point where you have to pick where you're going to go to school. Oh, yeah, Dad, I know. He says, well, have you given it some thought? I said, well, I have. I said, I think I'd like to go to Harvard or Dartmouth, those two. And he said, well, I've been giving it some thought. And I said, really? A little nervous now about what this was about. And he says, I think you should go to West Point. Your half-brother went to West Point, and he's been a marvelous experience for him. I said, yeah, Dad, I know, and it's hard. I wasn't sure I wanted to work that. I didn't tell him that. But in my mind, I was immature, as most 18-year-olds are, and I was thinking about how much fun I was going to have going to college. So I said, well, I got the perfect out because I didn't apply to West Point. And he says, well, I took care of that. I applied for you. I said, well, how could you do that? He says, well, I had your scores and everything. I sent them in. I said, but don't you have to take a physical exam? He says, yeah, that's tomorrow. That's why I'm telling you about it today. So you have to be down at the Armory at 9 a.m. So he said, well, don't worry about it. He says, I really question whether you'd make it. A good reverse psychology, And of course, I just took a hook, line, and sinker. The perfect out. I won't make it. And of course, just the opposite was true. I got an appointment to West Point. And then he said, well, you're going to go, aren't you? And I said, well, Dad, I told you all that. He says, well, this is the greatest opportunity in your life. And of course, he was right. I didn't see that for about a week, but he stopped talking to me. And I went to my mother and I said, Dad's not talking to me. He says, yeah, I know. He says, well, what's that all about? He said, well, you know what it's about. He wants you to go to West Point. So I gave it some thought and I said, can't be that bad. No. Now, I tell this because this is a true story. I know young men that are like really young. Their hearts are set on going to West Point. It just didn't happen in my case that way. Not initially anyway. So that's how I ended up here, July 2nd, 1957, and went through that Sally Port like thousands of others have done.
And before we get to talking more about your West Point experience, tell me a little bit about your father.
Yeah, my dad is a very interesting man. He was orphaned at 14. He had an 8th grade education because in those days he was a Swedish immigrant. And with his parents dying, he moved in with another Swedish family. He lived in an area in St. Paul that was called Swede Hollow. Everything was Swedish. Stores were Swedish. Everybody taught Swedish. And that's what they did. They took you in, but you weren't expected to go to school. You were expected to earn your keep. And the man he moved in with was a plumber. So my dad, at age 14, became an apprentice plumber. And that's what he did.
How about your mother?
My mother also was orphaned early and lived in an orphanage in Menominee, Wisconsin. She managed to get out of there at an early age and married somebody. I don't know. It was never too clear to me, but it was just an opportunity to get out of the orphanage. And until she met my dad.
And as a boy, you were an avid outdoorsman, and there was a family farm near the Brainerd Lakes area?
Yes. It really was a lake cabin up in Nisswa. It's about 150 miles north of the Twin Cities. And my dad bought a cabin there in 1943. So essentially, I grew up there and loved it. I fished, had a hatchet, went out in the woods and cut down poplar trees, which are easy to cut, and building a fort.
A very happy experience.
Yeah. And that's where my wife and I really call home now. We have a place in Florida to escape the winters, but the summertime we go back up north there, and that's our favorite place in the world.
You attended Breck School in St. Paul, correct, sir?
I did.
And your father helped save that school.
Yes, that's a great story. My dad would drive by Breck School on his way to his office every day, and he noticed that the construction had stopped. So one day he pulls over, and being a plumber, he's interested, maybe this is a job. So he went in and he said, well, what's happening? He said, well, we've run out of money, and we're trying to raise more money to finish this. And Dad said, well, I'd be willing to do the plumbing work here if you'd waive the tuition for my son to come here. And they said, oh, that's a deal. So that's how I ended up there.
And tell me a little bit about your experiences at that school.
Well, it was a very small school. I had 17 members in my class, so you can imagine. And this was back in the 40s, the 50s, graduated in 57. In schools like that were ROTC schools, so it had military boys school, private school, and it was considered very good. We had a PMS&T military. Of course, we marched, we had war uniforms and all that, and he was instrumental in my thinking about West Point. I was just thinking about it, but his name was Colonel P. Porter Wiggins. I'll never forget him. He said, Lee, you should go to West Point. So he was another influence on me. I had great, small schools, so anything you did, you were good at. Sure. It was fun. I played basketball and football and threw the discus on the track team, and, it was fun.
And part of Breck's alma mater includes honor God and country.
Yeah.
And so that must have been very familiar to you when you did come to West Point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very similar. Breck was part of the Episcopal or Anglican diocese. So that's where the God part of it came into. But it's the same motto we have here.
And you already talked about how you got to West Point, about, the influence to come here. What is your most vivid memory of our day, the first day at the military academy?
Walking to the Sallyport. And my parents came, and they had a care package, which I never really got to bring in. So they said, well, take the toothbrush. And I said, well, he said, well, we got toothbrushes too. So I didn't take anything in. But that's kind of it's like the no place of no return. When you walk through there and then get in and upperclassmen, pick up that suitcase, drop that suitcase, all that stuff. Pretty awesome.
Hey, how was your beast summer?
I think it was great. Like most people here, I was athletic, and so I didn't have. But one interesting thing, when I went here, do you remember the Asian flu back in 1957? Well, the Asian flu came to Beast Barracks, and it was awesome. People were just falling over. I mean, new cadets were falling over the hospital. And ultimately, I missed it for a week or so, and I think half the people were in the hospital, and sure enough, I got it, and I ended up in the hospital. They had mattresses on the floor. It wasn't, you're talking about, in those days, there weren't so many of us, but I think we started with 570, and half of them were in that hospital.
My goodness. And so was this the days when the hospital is now the admissions building?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, sir. The next summer you were at Buckner for field training. How was that?
Oh, it was great. My favorite part of the West Point, of course, I think was the field training here. It was amazing. So I enjoyed every part of that.
Yes, sir.
I like the armor.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, as you go through here, you get to experience all the different arms. So
how did you do academically at the academy?
I did all right. I hedged the question, right? I used to tell people, they said, well, how'd you do? I said, great. I finished at the very top of the fourth quartile. Oh, that sounds great. Well, I don't think a lot of people knew what the fourth quartile, but anyway, no, I was maybe 200 from the bottom.
Yes, sir.
But reasonably good student, but probably a better athlete.
What were your favorite classes?
Oh, I like statistics and math. My grandchildren, they struggle with statistics. I found it very interesting. Mostly, I enjoyed it because it is interesting. Statistical knowledge and so forth. But I liked everything.
Okay. Excellent. How did you do militarily at the academy?
Well, again, I'm hedging that question a little bit because the true answer is I didn't do very well. I graduated as a sergeant, which I think as everybody does, So, but I'm going to lay blame to my immaturity, even during the 4 years that I was here. And while I was trying to build my character and my leadership capabilities and so forth, I started out as a very immature kid. And if I had to do it over again, I'd do it a lot different.
Okay. And you've said already you were a gifted athlete and all that. Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit about playing sports here. You played football your plebe year. You did track your plebe year.
Yes.
You did basketball all 4 years.
Yes.
And skeet club as well.
Yeah. Well, I do a lot of skeet and trap now, so I'm involved with the skeet club here. But at the time, I wasn't involved in that. But it's a favorite. That sport, I can still shoot at 85, and it's something you can do for a long time.
What was it like playing basketball here?
It was great. We had winning teams. We went to the NIT. We weren't part of the NCAA then, but we went to the NIT 3 of the years that I was here. We did well. We had winning records, and we were good. We beat Navy a couple of years, and they beat us a couple of years.
What position did you play?
I played center.
Okay.
And 6'7", but I might say I did a pretty good rebounder.
Okay.
And I think my offensive and defensive, but I had a pretty good scoring average. It wasn't great. People asked me about basketball. I said I scored 26 points against Villanova as a senior.
Okay.
That was my highlight of the game. But my average was much lower than that.
Okay. Now, you were in public information detail and public relations council as a cadet.
Yes.
And as someone who's supported the academy for years financially, what do you think is the most important element for the American public to know about West Point?
Wow. Well, this is where young men and women now come to learn leadership and become individuals of high character. Should go back a little bit. The most recent years after I graduated, I was just not so active in the alumni and so forth. I came back to a few reunions, but our friend Freed Lowry was on the AOG staff, and he called me one day kind of out of the blue. Well, I had given some money, nothing major at all, but he picked that up, and he said, well, I see you've been sending in some money. I said, yeah, it's having an interest. And he says, well, you know Freed?
Oh, yes. Sir.
Well, okay. He's very direct.
Yes.
So he said, well, why don't you do more? And I said, well, quite frankly, nobody's asked me like you have. I said, I'd like to consider that. So at that point, then became close to Freed and the AOG and Tom Dyer, and it became like a destination for me. And I've really enjoyed that connection with the academy. I come back, not so much now, but try to come back 2 or 3 times a year. But for about 10 years, I was doing even more than that. So it's marvelous. But I don't know if I answered your question perfectly, but it's all about the leadership and building character.
Yes, sir. And Freed is a wonderful fellow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is. He's got stories on everybody. I bet he's even got a story about you.
I'm sure he does, sir. You were also involved in the Hi-Fi Club.
Yes.
Here at West Point. Tell me about that.
Well,
you did KDT too.
Yes. Yeah, I was the voice of West Point on the K. Did they still have that?
Yes, sir.
KDT, yeah. Well, it was kind of fun. Anyway, we'd play music during study hours, and that was about it. But once in a while, I'd give an opinion about something, but not too often. Well, the Hi-Fi Club, one of the things that my classmates know, I built a television set.
How about that?
And you remember Heathkit? Well, on one trip to New York, I bought the kit to put it all together. So, I just followed the instructions. She got the soldering iron, the whole thing. So in the evening when we were studying, some of what I was doing was putting this TV kit. Well, everybody knew about it, I thought. And what I would do when it was built and it worked, it had like a 6-inch screen. So, God, I was everybody's buddy. They'd all come to the room, and I'll be looking in there. And it was fun. And I was in the first division of Old Central area, which, of course, when that was built, they were all fireplace. That's how they heated it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still there. It's the only part of Central area that's still around. But in the fireplace, I had managed to get up there and put a pulley up there, and I had it on a rope. And when we were done with it, I put it up in the chimney.
Okay.
I thought we were so clever. Then I got some coaxial cable, ran it up the chimney, and then over to the first class club and hooked into their antenna system over there. Well, this went on for the better part of a year, but I think too many people talked about it. And then next thing I know, I got a request by the commandant, who is General Throckmorton,
mm-hmm.
who my dad knew. His parents had retired to Hawaii, and my folks were friends of his dad's. And he comes over there. Of course, I knew there was a connection, but he said, "Well, Mr. Anderson, I understand you've got a television." "Yes, sir." And he says, "Well, it's pretty ingenious." He said, "I'm going to tell you right now." He says, "I've known about the TV for about 6 months." He said, "You're not as clever as you thought, but I thought anybody that could come up with something like that, it deserves a little time enjoying it." He says, "But I've got your TV now, and when you graduate, you take it with you." And it was just a little box like this. But that was fun. And then he never mentioned that his parents knew my parents.
Yes, sir.
Who would be inappropriate.
Yes, sir.
And I think I got a couple of demerits for it. It was pretty light.
That is a fascinating story. I've never heard any story quite like that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Now, you mentioned the commandant. You also had two pretty influential superintendents during that time. Guard Davidson, who was superintendent up until 60,
right,
and William Westmoreland, who was superintendent through your graduation.
Yeah.
Any memories of either of those gentlemen?
Well, I remember that as a cadet, they were awesome. And this superintendent today, he's apt to jog with you in the morning or get you aside and sit and not then. They were sat to the right hand of God, and they told you that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I see General Davidson or Westmoreland coming, I'd go that way. And I think most of the cadets did. But I think they did very well.
Yes, sir.
General Davidson was a good-looking, gray-haired, dapper-looking guy. Westmoreland was a bit different, but quite outstanding.
Yes, sir. What is your most memorable West Point experience?
I think the people in our company.
Mm-hmm.
I was A1. In those days we sized everything by height. And A1 and M2, of course, were the flankers, and everybody in the middle and were shorter. We had a term for them too, but it's not important today. Now they integrated the Corps as far as height is concerned, and I think that's appropriate. We kind of liked it that way. Believe it or not, there were 100 men in Company A1. We were all average 6'3".
Okay.
So that's amazing. You're living with these giants, really.
Yes, sir.
And it was fun.
Who were some of your mentors at West Point?
In my class? Well, I think Peter Dawkins comes to mind. He's still is. He's a marvelous individual, and of course everybody knows him. And we all thought he'd be a 4-star.
Mm-hmm.
So I think part of the problem, by his own admission, that he was so desirable as an aide, as a general's aide, that he never got to the positions or got the assignments that he should have had in order to make it to 4 stars, I think. And I enjoyed to coach the basketball team.
Mm-hmm.
I actually played 2 years of football. You mentioned the plebe year, but I also went out for the spring practice. And I can remember Red Blake.
Mm-hmm.
He retired in 59 when we had the championship team. And his leadership style was he'd stand off to the side and he'd have a clipboard there. And all the practice and everything was done beforehand with the coaches. And then everyone did what they had to do, and he'd just stand and observe. I thought it was so, anyway, we were in awe of him. Never said anything. He didn't say, pick it up, let's get going or anything like that, but he didn't have to. I mean, he was wonderful role model, I thought. And everybody loved playing for him. Yeah, that was great. And a lot of those guys that we played football with, they went on to be really like Peter Dawkins and Bobby Anderson, and I could go Bobby Novogratz and go on and on. Carpenter, the Lonely End. Oh, we had a good team.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And it was fun. Those are fun years. A lot of different now. And I'm not an old grad that says, everything's gone to hell. I say everything has changed, and probably for the better.
Yes, sir.
Not completely for the better, because I, like every graduate, I have opinion about a few things, but I think an education at West Point is still the most important thing anybody could take advantage of.
Yes, sir. What did you choose to branch?
Well, another interesting question. I went into the Air Force. In those days, West Point had 50 slots to go into the Air Force, and that was kind of a holdover from the days when the Air Force Academy was not operational, and in part because the Air Force used to be the Army Air Force, so they were like one and the same. So they recognized like 50 people could do it. Now, why did I do that? My roommate, who I was close with until his passing 2 years ago, very close to him. His father was a 3-star in the Air Force. And I would be invited to go with my roommate and his family to the various events. And I love doing that. I love this man. So I think he had a big influence on me. And my roommate, of course, went Air Force. And I didn't fly.
Yes.
In those days, they said, well, you're too tall to fly. But that really wasn't my main interest. I went into the engineering Air Force and was assigned in the Tactical Air Command and served in a lot of interesting places as the base engineering officer. It was great. I'm 22 years old and I got 35 people in my office. Of course, the civil servants were really running it,
Yes,
so I had the big desk in the corner. So it was fun. I really enjoyed that. And I always wanted to go into construction. So that really worked out well.
Yes, sir. And who was your roommate?
Phil Smith.
Okay.
Phil went on to get a graduate degree and then a PhD in engineering. And he was brilliant. And he and I were very close. We had the opportunity. I didn't room with him my freshman year or plebe year, but the next 3 years we did. And so we got close, that much time together. He incidentally invented the taser. He didn't invent it, but he was able to buy the taser gun project. And it wasn't just his claim to fame. He did a lot of great things, but that was certainly one of them.
Excellent. Now, you've already mentioned that you were the base engineering officer at Luke Air Force Base, and it was the 4510 Combat Crew Training Wing?
Exactly.
Okay.
Boy, yeah, you've done your homework.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yes, sir. What were your experiences like there?
Oh, well, they were great. I enjoyed the military. I really did. We're coming to a point in my story where I'm going to tell you how I got out of the service, but for the time that I was in it, I really enjoyed it, and I would have loved to have had. I always say to everybody, I wish I had 2 lives to live. I would have enjoyed serving one as a career officer in the military.
Yes,
and
sir.
it was fun.
After 3 years in the Air Force, you left active duty to help your father run the family business because had he become ill?
Yes. Like I said, aside from my half-brother, who was still in the military at those times, we're a very small family, and he was a contractor at this point now and doing well, and he wanted me to come into the business. And he'd had a heart attack in 1963. And so, again, like telling me I'm going to go to West Point, he said, you need to come home now. And I said, well, Dad, this was all your idea. And he says, yeah, I know. He said, but if I'm not here to help you get started in the business, you'll be missing out on something. Oh, it was particularly hard. I'd just been transferred to Amsterdam Air Force Base, and I really wanted to do that, but my dad said, no, you need to come home, so I agreed to do that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And then around this time, maybe a year or two later, is that when you married Penny?
Yes.
How did you meet?
Well, I'd been gone 7 years from Minneapolis, and all my friends went to small school. They had all scattered to the winds and so forth, so I really didn't know anybody, but I was certainly interested. My mother was in a bridge club, and over the bridge table, she said, well, my son's here, and he'd like to meet some nice young girls, and anybody got any ideas? Well, apparently somebody talked about it, and a friend of hers, whose son worked at a ladies' fashion store, said that they had floor models and people like that. And one of them was willing to have coffee with me. So I said, great. So we went out to coffee, and we really hit it off. That would have been in October. And January, I asked her to marry me, and in June, we got married.
Of 65.
Yeah. 59 years next week.
Congratulations.
Oh, yeah. It's wonderful.
Yes, sir.
I always say I belong to the Moo Club, married only once.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's great. It's never as perfect as everybody say, but for the most part, for all those years, we've been a perfect match.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So you returned home, and the business is API.
Yeah.
It's fire protection and construction. Tell me a little bit about the business.
Well, okay. Now, my dad was in the plumbing business. This is the plumbing business. So what happened was, I got home. My dad had a partner in the business, in his business. And so first day on the job, I'm sitting there, and my dad says, his partner was Tony. He said, Tony, he says, Lee's here. He said, yeah, I can see him, He said, yeah. He said, well, it was always my thought that we could bring him into the business. He says, my dad's name was Reuben. Tony says, well, Reuben, we've never talked about this. I looked at my dad like, you never talked about it? And my dad says, well, I didn't think it'd be a problem. Well, it really wasn't a problem, but he kind of got blindsided, So my dad says, well, I'll work on Tony. He said, I know a friend that has a business that he had a small interest in over in St. Paul. They had 13 employees. He says, you go over there and so forth. And then when Tony says, okay, then I'll bring you back. So I went over there, and after the first week, the manager there, in those days, everybody had a pencil box of pencil. He picks up that, throws it across the room, because we were so small. We're all in one little office. So, and the pencils go every place. I quit. I said, well, John, what's wrong? He says, you ask too many questions, and I suspect you're going to be running this place anyway. So, well, he was right. I called my dad and said, Dad, John quit. He says, well, you run it. So it was in 1 week, I went from nothing to managing this small country, but it was really small. And that was marvelous. That was 1964. And the company grew, and we didn't have any money, nor did we have a lot of credit. So, but I was always interested in acquiring businesses. So the businesses we were acquiring were those that either were out of cash or had some problems of some kind, but basically were a good business, and we could buy it like for $1 and so forth, the first 2 or 3. And we did this. And then over the years, we started to prosper a little more, and we got a little credit, could borrow some money, and so forth and so on. So for many years, the last 15 or 20 years, we were buying large companies, some of them 400 or 500 millions in revenue. When I sold the company 5 years ago, we were doing $4 billion, and we had 20,000 employees. Today, and they took the company public. Today, they're doing $8 billion with 30,000 employees. It's just amazing.
Yes, sir.
But all through acquisition, really, and some organic growth as well, too, but very profitable, great, and mostly fire protection, but we're into a lot of things. We make garage doors and fiberglass insulation, all construction related, either installation or manufacturing, but by far the largest segment of that would be the fire protection, alarm, and security business. And they're the largest now in the world.
Yes, sir.
By quite a bit.
And this all began from a 1926 company, the Reuben L. Anderson Mechanical Company.
Yeah, that's it. My dad started the insulation in 1926, so they're about 98 years old now. And that's the same company that he sent me over to. At that point, they became a corporation and then split off from the plumbing company.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
What did you learn at West Point that helped you in the business world?
Well, interesting. I think that the single most important thing is to recognize the employees for what they really are. I didn't make this business. Our employees made it. And today, and as well as when I was there, we call every employee a leader. And everybody has the ability to lead in that company. We don't use the term employees anymore. 85, I had an opportunity to start an ESOP for the employees, which I did. I sold a third of the stock for $3.5 million because I wanted to use that money to buy another company that I knew about, that outside of the API company. And with that ESOP program, when we sold our company, I wrote a check to the employees for $1 billion. I'm very proud of that. We have several hundred, either many millionaires, but some of them have like 10 million or more because they were there in 1985. When we first got the stock and the ESOP, we were very generous handing it out because it was free. And, well, you just wanted to do that. So if you were there then, you really got a really good deal.
Yes,
and most of those people kept their stock in the new company. And since in the last 5 years, that's gone up 4 times.
Wow.
So now that $1 billion is $4 billion. It's all in the hands of the employees. And the thing I'm most proud about.
Yes, sir.
You know?
So that's what you would consider your greatest success then, is taking care of your people.
Yeah, one of them. And it all started by recognizing them as leaders and not just employees. There's a difference in and for an individual to have a share of stock or 100,000 shares of stock makes all the difference in the world. Psychologically, they say, I'm a part of this. And we treat them that way. We do a lot of relating back to them. The other aspect that I'm really proud of, too, is that we have a leadership development program, which I started. So not surprising, but most of those are academy graduates that are now working for our company. The graduates of this institution, as well as other service academies, are the greatest source. And now everybody's figured this out. The recruiters are looking for academy graduates. But when we started this about 25 years ago, I mean, not so much, you know, and I'm proud to say I think we're one of the first, and we've been recognized by U.S. Chamber of Commerce for just that. And yes, with the Hire Our Heroes program that I've been involved in. So yes, I'd say that is another thing that I'm very proud of. The company continues to hire leaders from the Service Academy, but not entirely. I mean, we've got a number of others, but I'd say right now there's about 40 West Point graduates running our companies, and we have about 50 companies that make up the entire group. And I'd say half of those are being ran by West Point graduates.
Yes, sir.
And it's worked out terrific. Even some that came and then for whatever reason drifted off, maybe it wasn't a perfect fit, went to work somewhere else. They're leading the companies that they left for.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Over the years, approximately how many West Point grads have you had come through your company?
Oh, I'm going to say 60 or 70 that I can tell you about.
Okay. Yes, sir. And do you find that members of the Long Gray Line bring something special that's not seen in others that come to your company?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, leaders of character is what we talk about here, and it is nothing could be more true.
Yes, sir. Have you experienced, what challenges have you experienced with running your company?
Well, now that I'm retired, I can sit back and cherry pick a lot of things that they do. Public companies, I never wanted to be public. I mean, I knew how to do that, and people came to me and said, we can take you public. You can probably expect a 2 or 3 times equity increase. And I said, I just don't want to do that because I don't know that I'd do well as a public company CEO. And I still feel that way. And probably even more so than the fellow that's running this huge company now is a really good friend of mine. And I hired him probably 25 years ago and knew almost instantly, and he's not an academy graduate, that he was really something special. And he's stayed there now this 5 years. And I think he's 59. I suspect he'll stay to 65, but with stock options, I think he's making $20 million a year or maybe more. I don't know.
Yes, sir.
And but boy, he's worth it. He's terrific. But the thing that he's done, I'm proud to say, is he's still carrying on the same decisions that we made back when he first came to work there. And that seemed to work so well for us.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Excellent. Now, sir, you are well known for your philanthropy, and you support all kinds of organizations: Ducks Unlimited, U.S. Sportsmen's Alliance, International Seakeepers Society, in addition to academic institutions, including West Point.
Yeah. Well, I think a sense of giving has always been a strong sense in our family, starting with my dad. And of course, the numbers were a lot smaller then, but he taught me that you have to give back in order to get. And I've believed that wholeheartedly. My wife and I, and she's a part of this as well, but we're most interested in veterans affairs, and that can be a whole lot of different things, from trying to cure mental illness to finding jobs. And I think we probably commit ourselves to 5 or 6 different groups in that regard. And then the other thing is higher education, which would be West Point and another university that I'm involved in, as well as the education, which I mentioned. But that's been the fun part. And for my wife and I, we've enjoyed being involved in these different organizations.
Yes, sir. And what does it mean to you and your wife to be honored as one of the top 30 philanthropists in the country?
Well, I'm very proud of all that, of course. I don't like to dwell on what we do or don't do because that's just not my nature.
Sure.
But we're very proud of what we do. And I thought of the other thing, too. It's children's health.
Yes, sir.
We're very involved in 3 or 4 hospitals. We have a grandson that has a form of muscular dystrophy. And I think that really started our real intense interest in helping out, identify the genes, and which they have since done. But it's just not him. It's just all children's diseases that we're interested in.
Yes, sir. And what values or attributes do you look for in the organizations that you choose to support?
I think we look for people that don't just give the money or take the money, but they also know how to spend the money. A lot of people have great causes, but they really don't know how to handle the money. And it just gets wasted.
Right.
So we look for organizations that are willing to provide the help and to really go into the charity and sit there, to go to all the meetings, make sure that they're doing things correctly. So we look at that.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, sir.
These are all for children's organizations, which could include the Boys and Girls Clubs and many different things like that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So what has it meant to you to be honored as a Pantheon inductee dedicated to wildlife conservation around the world?
Well, that's a whole nother story, of course, to the hunting. I've done a lot of hunting and actually started hunting big game 42 years ago, and I had the opportunity to do a lot of that. Some people would say, well, you've done too much of it, but it's what I really enjoy. I just came back from a 20-day experience in Australia just a couple of days ago. But I love that, and I don't just shoot animals. I mean, I see it as a way to protect the animals and to make sure that there are people. The money that is spent on this all goes back into the countries that we go to, especially in Africa. If it wasn't for that, those people with the poaching and so forth would wipe out the entire race of animals. So the Pantheon is one of it's not the only one, but it's probably recognized as the most difficult award to win. You have to achieve a whole number of other hunting achievements, including the North American 29 animals. We have 29 animals in North America. You have to have those. You have to have 30 species of wild sheep in the world, 30 species of wild goats in the world. And then, on top of that, the Safari Club International has 26 diamond level groups. It might be all the oxen in the world or whatever, and you have to have achieved all of that. So it's hard. It's not anything you're going to do in a day or two, because I've probably been on 200 safaris in my life, and maybe a lot of them did for a single animal. So that was those of us that are involved in hunting. That was a real recognition for me. I was the 19th individual lifetime to ever have worn. And there's 40,000 active hunters, and they're not all trying to get that award, but there's only been 19 of us ever achieved that.
Wow, that's impressive. Now, sir, you mentioned some of the organizations that you support. For example, Children's Hospital in Boston.
Yeah.
You also support University of St. Thomas in St. Paul.
Yes.
And the Defenders Lodge in Palo Alto, California, for veterans receiving care at the hospital.
Right.
You mentioned Helping Our Heroes program for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and Conservation Education, the Boone and Crockett Club in Montana.
Yeah.
Are there any of those that you wish to touch on more? Or?
Jim Nicholson, Secretary Nicholson, he's my classmate, and he and I are very good friends, and he's not above suggesting ways that I can help to do things like the Defenders Lodge. Very proud of that in San Jose. These VA hospitals, they're great, but the veterans, they come there, and many of them don't have the money for a room even, and this is a true story. I wouldn't have believed it, but they sleep in their car, but they need the care. So they get there and they sleep in their car. I said, well, that's terrible. So he said, well, they want to build a Defenders Lodge for these people, and they're free of charge to veterans. And I think they put some unbelievable amount of veterans through that lodge. There's like 250 rooms, and it's all free, everything, including the meals. I said, boy, I could get behind that one. That was really good.
Yes, sir.
But I like them all. Hire Our Heroes is the other big one. The statistics on that are just amazing. It's backed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Washington, and they are continually hiring. They have groups go around the country, and a lot of people. That's one of the resources we use in my company to hire West Point graduates as well as military. I will hire a veteran over anybody, regardless, and it has worked out so well for us. so well. And that's just not lip service. That's what we do.
Yes, sir.
Out of all of our employees, I think we're over 20% veteran leaders in the company.
Well, that's wonderful.
Now, that doesn't sound like I wish I could have said it's 80, but the 20 is a high number when you do the statistics.
Sir, what do you feel are some of your greatest accomplishments?
Well, again, some of that, I guess, is probably obvious. I mean, I think I'm successful in business, mostly because I allow the people to do the decision-making, and I can sit back and orchestrate it. And I've always managed that way, to have these wonderful leaders doing everything, giving them the responsibility, and they'll take it up and run with it. I mean, that people should do that. That's where it's the way to lead, of course, is by turning over the leadership to other people.
Yes, sir.
I think we've done well in that with our business. I'm a person of faith. That's an important part of my wife and our mantra. And I know that's been very helpful as well. And you need to be appreciative of what's come your way.
Yes, sir.
Never take anything for granted. And those are some of the things.
Yes, sir.
Hard for me to talk about that, and you got to, I don't want to appear like, Mr. Wonderful or anything, because I'm not.
Right.
I just had lots of opportunities, all because of this place.
Yes,
That's
sir.
the one thing I will talk about. If I hadn't, I go back to that immaturity level, you can't graduate here and still be very immature. You're somewhere along the line, you have to drink the Kool-Aid and figure out that isn't going to work. So that's why people come here.
So do you still have anything on your to-do list?
Well, I'm still working on a few things, but I mostly just enjoy life now. And my wife and I, we go up to that little cabin up in Nisswa, Minnesota, and sit out there and say, boy, isn't life wonderful? Look at the lake. And it really is.
Do you have any regrets, sir?
No.
Okay.
I have no regret. Otherwise, I'd go back and say I would have liked to have had a career in the military. That is one of the best things. And my wife and I, we attended the one to Normandy here back a few years.
We have some fabulous staff rides in the history department that are well subscribed by the cadets, and they are life-changing.
Yeah.
The things they learn on those staff rides.
And we had so much fun. We had 14 cadets with us, and then 4 professors that went with us. And boy, we loved it. And just being for a couple of weeks, being with the cadets for all the meals and listening to them and so forth, it restated my belief in how wonderful job we do here. And it's a bit expensive, but boy, I'd always endow that. And they've added a number of more new ones. I mean, it was always Gettysburg and Normandy and, but now they've got some really interesting things. The way they have it, each cadet has an opportunity to talk about the day's events, and they have to study. We went to see the Pegasus Bridge. Is always one of my favorite in France. And the story behind how the Brits came in and with their gliders at night, and the Germans were so drunk they didn't even hear the gliders land. You're not supposed to hear them land. But they were able to get over the bridge. They knew where all the detonation points were, and because they were ready to blow that bridge. But just being there and listening to people on the ground.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, sir, through your giving to West Point and all the programs you endow and things like that, how do you hope to inspire the Corps of Cadets through the programs you support?
We all recognize that the Department of Defense does not provide the funds for some of the niceties that people like myself and others who can give some money and promote some projects here can do. And so I hope that they see what we're doing. The East Stadium now is it's the gorilla in the room. And boy, that's going to be nice when we do it in 2 years. I was so pleased to see how they took down that building in 2 weeks. That's going to be exciting. And things like that we're graduates. I would like to see more graduates get involved it doesn't have to be financially. It's to become emotionally involved in what's going on here. And there's always going to be a few that'll say, and I've heard them in the past to say, well, West Point didn't really do anything for me, believe it or not. And I just can't believe that. I said, well, if I had the chance to visit with these people, I said, we can identify some things that it's done for you. You say that, but that can't be possible. You couldn't have gone here and not been improved as a matter of being here. So I think what I'd like to continue to do.
Yes, sir.
I just can't say enough about West Point. My whole life has revolved around that. Not my entire life, but the last 25 years or so.
Right.
Been very pleased to be able to help.
If you could share one thing with fellow West Point graduates, what would it be?
I think we could do a little better job in the AOG convincing graduates to get on board earlier rather than later. Like there was a period of probably 25 years that I was missing out, but didn't really realize that. You know, you're busy either in your military career, your business career, wherever it is. It's a wealth of talent in the graduate corps that if we could get them to understand you need to come back and get involved, that would really help.
Yes, sir.
And there are so many graduates that have done so well, mostly because they went here, but are doing well, but really aren't participating in the reason that they did well.
Yes, sir.
That's the connection we have to make. I think everybody understands that, and I think it's getting better. You know, I know there's 4 or 5 names of people that just a few years ago weren't doing anything. Today, they're at the top of the list. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Somebody has to keep talking to them. And I talk to some of these people, too, and encourage them to be more helpful financially.
Yes, sir. Now, you've talked about this a little bit already, but your motto, your family motto, growing up Anderson, how do you compare growing up Anderson to the Cadet Honor Code?
Well, I think the Honor Code is the basis for everything that happens here. I would hate to see the Academy go away from that. I know we've got a new definition of duty, honor, and country. I understand they're not saying it's not duty, honor, and country, but they've embellished that a little bit to include more things. People smarter than I working on that, I guess. But boy, that's the basis of my life, and I believe in it so strongly. Everything I do, I think about, is this the honorable thing to do?
Yes, sir.
And I've always been that way.
Sir, what does your service to the nation mean to you?
I think having the opportunity to give back to the nation vis-a-vis West Point, or could be in many different ways and so forth, has been the cornerstone of my life. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I think every graduate has the opportunity to do that. And they have to sit down and reflect on what's really important to them. And I imagine in some cases, it's not particularly important to them, but it should be.
Final question for you, sir.
Okay.
And you've talked about this throughout the interview.
Yes.
But just to encapsulate it, what does West Point mean to you?
West Point is the greatest institution that I'm aware of that we have in this country. You think of the outstanding individuals in this country, a large number of West Point graduates, and I'm very proud. I've had friends whose sons and daughters have gone here, mostly the sons, but who didn't see the value in it, and I've never been able to understand that. They weren't here long enough to really feel the benefits of it. They're there, the benefits are there, but they don't feel them right away. You have to be more mature in life before you can really understand what it's done. But in my life, it's been the key to everything. And it's not just success, it's everything else that's important to everybody.
Yes, sir. Sir, thank you so much
well, all right.
for sharing your story with us.
Yes.
This has been phenomenal.
For listening.
Thank you for listening to the WPAOG Broadcast Network. Please take a moment to rate and review the show, and join us each week for a new episode. Thank you for listening.